the questions around abortion laws again. It's a big week for Ireland and such a fascinating moment in that nation's history. Is abortion, though, is it a health issue, as Yes campaigners in Ireland are saying, or is it a moral issue, which is the central argument of the No campaigners? Good afternoon to you. If you're a regular listener, you'll have noticed I wasn't here yesterday. I was actually in the Republic of Ireland for personal reasons, but I noticed in my travels back and forth quite a lot of posters and overheard a few conversations anyway, about the vote that's taking place in the Republic of Ireland on Friday. A vote to repeal or not the 8th Amendment of the Irish Constitution. Now, that amendment, just to reiterate, in case you don't know what it is, that amendment gives the life of a fetus at whatever stage of gestation equivalence with the life of the mother, barring a few exceptional circumstances. It's going to be a huge moment for Ireland, this, it seems to me, either way, because this is my own personal interpretation of it. I think it is, it's going to be a statement of where Ireland is at. It's a country in massive transition in a very particular way. Most countries are in transition, I suppose, at some point or other, but in a very particular way. Ireland, since the scandals around the Catholic Church and since the appalling stories that have emerged over decades, really, if not centuries, about particularly the treatment of women, particularly pregnant women in Ireland over the years, because of societal attitudes driven largely by the Church at the time. This is a moment in Ireland's history, in the Republic's history, when it will make a very firm statement about how far down the road of change it is prepared to go. And it's far from clear what that is. This is the same year, by the way, when there'll be the first papal visit to the Republic in something like 40 years. Because it is 40 years. It was 1979, I think, when John Paul II went, and Pope Francis is due to go in the summer of this year as well. And there's no doubt that church teaching and the historically religious culture, Catholic religious culture of Ireland has driven its attitudes to abortion. It's been embedded in Ireland's religious culture. And it's no surprise to me that many pro-life, anti-abortion campaigners have travelled from the United States in particular to make their voices heard in this campaign. And some of the posters that I saw on my journeys through Ireland yesterday were very stark. It didn't surprise me at all. The pictures didn't hold back in terms of their literalness, and then the very personalising of those pictures. One statement said above a picture of a fetus, it said, your vote will kill her or save her. Really personalising things. That was for a campaign against repealing the 8th Amendment, and others very different in nature for the yes vote, those who want to repeal the 8th Amendment. I see here in the Independent today an Irish dairy farmer, a young woman in her 30s, it looks like to me, making a comparison between her cows and Irish women. She says, my cows get better treatment than women do when they're pregnant in the Republic, and for that reason I will be voting yes to repeal the 8th, she says. Now, for all that is Ireland's issue and it's Ireland's vote, the whole conversation, it seems to me, that's taking place in the Republic just throws up all of those questions around abortion, whichever position in your views you actually take. I say side. There are clearly two sides at the extremes, but I think most people operate in the middle somewhere when it comes to attitudes to abortion. Certainly in this country, that's what the polling would suggest. I want to know from you really simple question, is abortion simply a reproductive health issue, or is it a moral issue? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Here to talk with me and each other are Aisling Hubert, pro-life campaigner and client of Christian Concern, who attempt to prosecute doctors court offering gender abortion, or have done in the past, and Professor Wendy Savage, co-chair of Doctors for Choice UK. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Aisling, first of all, a moral question or a health question?
Well, I think the debate entirely hinges on the question, are the unborn human beings? And if they're not human beings, then of course it's not going to be a moral issue. It's, actually we don't even really need to discuss it. We could be discussing tooth extractions or whatever. But if the unborn are human beings, then this is of absolute importance, because we're discussing whether it's okay to intentionally decapitate, dismember, and even disembowel an innocent, alive, and whole human being. So we need to look at science. What does science say about the beginning of human life? And it's absolute. It's so clear that you are, from the moment of fertilization, distinct, living, and whole. The only difference between you now and the embryo you once were is your age. But then when we look at abortion, what is it? And I want to just say one thing. There's one of the world's leading abortionists, Warren Hearns, describes himself performing abortion procedures, saying the sensations of dismemberment flow through the forceps like an electric current. Now, does that sound like killing to you? It certainly does to me. So it's absolutely a human rights, a moral issue that we are discussing here.
Okay, Professor Wendy Savage.
Well, whilst I accept that life begins at conception, we mustn't forget that over half of all fertilised eggs are lost before the first missed period, and then another 10% are lost in the next 3 months of pregnancy. So I see the fetus as a potential human life, and therefore I think that to equate a fetus who is a potential human life with a woman who is alive and has a family and connections and everything else is completely wrong. And that's why I do hope that the people in Ireland vote yes to this amendment. And I'm slightly worried because I heard on Woman's Hour that the voting paper is going to say something about the 39th Amendment. And whilst it is true that this is the 39th Amendment of the Constitution, I fear that some people may be confused if that is the wording that's on the voting paper.
Some reason.
Yep.
Do carry on.
So as we've got a potential human life, I think we should talk about that as a potential human life and stop talking about babies and all the rest of it, because it's not yet a baby.
Well, just before I get back to Aisling on what you've just said, I think a lot of people will understand what you say when we're talking about tiny things invisible to the human eye. The half of all fertilised eggs are lost, 1/10 in the first 3 months. Where are you on the timescale? Because at 24 weeks, 20 weeks, 18 weeks, 15 weeks, 12 weeks, you are not a tiny speck, are you? You are a visible human being.
True enough, at 12 weeks. 90% of abortions in this country are now done by 12 weeks. And very few are done after 24 weeks.
But I'm mining that distinction very deliberately, because you've set out very clearly where you believe human status arrives, because that's different from human life in a way, isn't it? Or you can certainly argue that it is. But you've made it very clear where you think human status arrives. Does the practice of it being mostly under 12 weeks mean that we should look again at the 12 weeks to 24 week period? Or when does human status only kick in when we decide, rather than when something real actually happens?
I think the person who's got to make the decision is the woman. She's the person who's going to be looking after a child if it's born, often to the very end of her life. And emotionally, there is absolutely no doubt that if you're doing an abortion, there is a difference between doing one at 12 weeks and one at 24 weeks. Excuse me.
Let me bring Aisling in again at this point, and you can have a good old cough. I've been there, Wendy Savage. I know what it's like. Aisling, do respond to some of the things you've heard.
Yeah. Right. So just addressing the point of, abortions happening at different stages. So 3 weeks, so even less than 3 weeks, 16 days, you had a heartbeat. 6 weeks, brain waves, ovaries developing at 8 weeks. From 10 weeks, everything's there. It's just growing. So human development is on a continuum all the way up to the point of birth. And actually, after birth, we are still developing. So 2-year-olds haven't reached puberty yet we wouldn't say that they are less human and less worthy of the right to life. So I believe that we should not be discriminating against the unborn based on their size, their level of development, their environment, or their age. You know, these things, these change throughout the course of our lives. And when we start defining personhood, when we get the right to life based on how we function,
but that is what that is.
Very dangerous.
But defining personhood and defining when someone has human status, therefore human rights. I mean, you know, people have their own views pre and post birth, but that's central to the argument, isn't it? Personhood.
Well, if we look at this term personhood, it's grounded in discrimination, and we've seen this term used throughout history to define who would get the right to life. When we look at the time of the slave trade, or we look at the American reservation camps, they weren't persons in the legal sense, or even the Holocaust, the Jews weren't persons in the legal sense. And now we're defining it based on age. So it's in gender, religion, race, and age. What is the difference? So when we even look at human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established to prevent crimes against humanity, discriminating against people based on a different function. And what is happening at the moment? We're discriminating against the unborn based on their age, and they're younger.
Let me bring Wendy Savage back in. One thing I've always struggled with is, and something you said has prompted me to ask you about it, when you said it has to be down to the woman, you know, the decision about whether to abort at 12, 10, 15, 24 weeks, it has to be down to the woman, you know, because legally in this country, obviously, it goes up to 24. I wonder about that, because if a woman was tearing her hair out when her child of 4 months old was causing her to feel, you know, suicidal with stress, we wouldn't say she's the mother. She has to decide whether it lives or dies. What's the difference for the space of 14 weeks?
As I've said, the fetus is a potential person. The fetus is dependent upon
until it breathes air. Is that what you're saying?
Until it's born.
Okay.
And until the baby is born, it is dependent upon its mother. Now,
well, it's dependent upon its mother after it's born, isn't it? If she just left it in the street and walked away, it would die, wouldn't it?
It's physiologically dependent upon its mother. It's part of her body. Now, the woman is the one who has got the responsibility for looking after this infant when it's born, but it isn't a person until it's born. That's my view, and it's a potential person until it's born.
Something happens, Aisling, according to Wendy Savage, in the birth canal after birth that changes the status of that baby. You say no, presumably, to that.
Well, I find it quite incredible to believe that something so dramatic as changing a non-human into a human happens in an 8-inch journey down a birth canal. I mean, I don't change what I am if I get in my car and drive off, you know, to make a 5-mile journey to the shops or something. So how does an 8-inch journey, literally changing environment, change a non-person into a person? And I would like to ask Wendy, what would you do 1 minute before birth to that non-person fetus to get rid of them? What does that procedure actually look like? Can you describe it to us? What happens?
Let's stop talking about 8 inches vaginas, because the labour takes quite some time, about 12 hours in the first...
She's talking about the birth canal.
Yes, I know she's talking about the birth canal, but it's a sort of red herring, really. The difference is that before the child is born, it is dependent totally on its mother for its existence. After it's born, it is a person in its own right. All right, dependent and the rest of it. But, you know, it's interesting that the fetus is not a legal entity in this country and in most countries in the world. And lawyers are not exactly, you know, known for being emotional about things. This is a logical description of the fact that the fetus is not yet a person. It is a potential person. And I think the woman, if she doesn't want to be pregnant, and, you know, people have now forgotten what it was like, but before the Act was changed in the 1960s, 50 women a year, approximately, were dying from self-induced abortion. And in the world itself, 13% of women, of those dying in association with pregnancy, die from unsafe abortion.
Okay, final.
And women have a really strong desire to have a child or not to have a child, and it's up to her. She knows what she can cope with, how she'd be able to bring up a child, etc. And we should respect that and respect her as an autonomous human being able to make her own decisions.
Okay, final thought from you, Aisling?
I actually think that Wendy has slightly dodged the question here. It's a really important one that we must talk about, which is what is abortion? What is this thing that we're talking about? And as an abortionist, Wendy, who's done thousands of abortions, she really is the one that should be describing this to us. But if she won't...
Why do you use the term abortionist instead of doctor, just out of interest? It's quite loaded, isn't it? It's quite an aggressive word.
If you think about the term doctors, if we're going to talk about healthcare as well, pregnancy isn't a disease that needs to be cured. So if you're going to, so I just think, just coming back to that point, it's important that we really look at what is abortion. And it's important that people see it, that they even watch it and decide for themselves by looking at it, is that healthcare? Or is that the intentional destruction of an innocent human being?
OK, well, that is our question today. Which is it? Thank you very much indeed to both of you for talking to us so clearly. Aisling Hubert, pro-life campaigner, and Professor Wendy Savage, co-chair of Doctors for Choice UK.